Hello, dear students. In this video, we're going to start a new chapter about respiration, part 1. In part 1, we're going to identify the different organs of the respiratory system. Also, students will list the characteristics that favor the exchange of gases at the level of the alveoli. While in the second part, part 2, for respiration, we will study the reactions between hemoglobin and the respiratory gases, meaning that oxygen and carbon dioxide, and we will learn how to write the word equation and the chemical equation as well. We will distinguish between the synthesis reaction and the assimilation one. Respiration. What is respiration? Respiratory system. Let's move to the anatomy of the respiratory system. Activity 1, the organization of the respiratory system of humans. Respiratory system consists of, we have the nasal cavities, we have the mouth, pharynx, larynx, the trachea, lungs, which is the most important part of the respiratory system of human. We have the bronchus, the bronchioles, the alveoli or the air sacs, and here we have the diaphragm. So here, as I said, the lung is the most important part of the respiratory system in humans. Now we will determine the pathway of air along the respiratory system. So this, you have to know it. You have to know that the air enters the nose through the nasal cavities and then to the pharynx, to the larynx, to the trachea, to the lungs, bronchus, bronchioles, and finally to the alveoli. So this represents the pathway. Number 1, the nasal cavities. Number 2, pharynx. Number 3, larynx. Number 4, the trachea. Number 5, the bronchus. Number 6, the bronchioles. And finally, they reach the alveoli. What is the difference between breathing and respiration? Breathing is the actual mechanical intake of air. Breathing mainly consists of two phases, inhalation and exhalation. So inhalation and exhalation, they represent the respiratory movements. Inhalation or inspiration is the process of taking in air. This air is rich in oxygen and poor in carbon dioxide. So as I said, inhalation is the process of taking in air. This air is rich in oxygen gas and it's poor in carbon dioxide in CO2. Exhalation, which means the expiration, exhalation represents the process of releasing air outside the body. This air is going to be poor in oxygen. Why? Because we consume the oxygen already inside our body, and it's going to be rich in CO2. So let's repeat. Inhalation is the process of taking air in, inhalation, while exhalation, exit, the process of releasing air outside the body. Diffusion. What is diffusion? Diffusion, it's the movement of the particles of a substance from a medium of high concentration, of high pressure, of high volume, of high amount to a medium having low concentration or low pressure or low volume or low amount in this substance. So this is the definition of diffusion. You have to know that diffusion is the movement of a particle of a substance from a medium of high concentration or a medium of high pressure or a medium of high volume or a medium of high amount of a substance to a medium having low concentration or low pressure or low amount in the same substance. What is the role of the respiratory system? As you know, respiratory system is responsible for the gaseous exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. They represent oxygen and carbon dioxide. They represent the respiratory gases that are exchanged with the environment. So, respiratory system is responsible for the gaseous exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. These two gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide, they are called the respiratory gases with the environment. Trace the pathway of the air inside the respiratory system of mammals. So it moves from the nose through the nasal cavities, then to the pharynx, to the larynx, the trachea, the bronchus, the bronchioles, and we have the alveoli, which are the air sacs. Why are the lungs very rich, as you see here, very rich in blood vessels? This will help us to understand in the coming slides. So, lungs. Lungs, they are spongy. Why? Due to the many pores for air sacs. They are light and they are elastic. As you know, we have two lungs, the right lung and the left lung. Right lung is made up of three lobes, whereas the left lung is made up of two lobes. Gas exchange between the air and the blood occurs at the level of the alveoli in the lungs. Here you have to pay attention here. We have some characteristics that favors the gaseous exchange at the level of the alveoli. So you have to study these characteristics. Number one, large surface area of exchange of the alveoli. We have thin wall of the alveoli. And number three, it's highly vascularized, rich in blood vessels. So richness in blood vessels helps the gaseous exchange at the level of the alveoli. Activity 3, respiratory gas exchange. Which gases are the respiratory gases? Already we know that they are the oxygen and a carbon dioxide. But let's see here. What happens to the blood when it enters the lungs? Here we have this question, this application. In this table, we have the variation of the quantity of oxygen and carbon dioxide, which are the respiratory gases, in milliliter for each 100 milliliter of blood, and blood entering the lungs and blood leaving the lungs. Okay? So, and first question, compare the results of the table showing the composition of blood entering, blood leaving, interpret the results. As you see here, blood entering, the amount of oxygen was 15, while the blood leaving it was 20. Carbon dioxide in the blood entering 53, in the blood leaving it was 49. Here 15 it increases to 20, 53 it decreases to 49. So the blood entering the lungs contains less oxygen, 15 milliliter, than the blood leaving the lungs, which is 20 milliliter, whereas the blood entering the lungs contains more carbon dioxide, 53 milliliter, than the blood leaving the lungs, which is 49 milliliter. Interpret, the quantity of oxygen gas in blood entering the lungs is 15 milliliter, and here interpret increases. You don't have to say less than or greater than. So this indicates that the oxygen gas diffuses from the lungs, medium rich in oxygen, to the blood, medium poor in oxygen, or less amount in oxygen, less concentration. While the quantity of carbon dioxide in blood entering the lungs is 53 milliliter, and it decreases. Pay attention here, increases and decreases. Okay, and the interpret, analysis plus indication, to 49 milliliter and the blood leaving the lungs. This indicates that the carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood, medium rich in carbon dioxide, to the lungs, medium poor in carbon dioxide. So, and this we determine that in the interpret we don't have to use greater than or less than, while we use it in the case of compare. In the case of interpret, it's analyze plus an indication. So analysis, you have to say increases or decreases. you have to know from now on that the oxygen gas diffuses from the lungs to the blood, lungs medium rich in oxygen to the blood medium poor in oxygen, whereas carbon dioxide decreases, uh, diffuses from the blood medium rich in carbon dioxide to the lungs medium which is poor in carbon dioxide gas. Question number two says you have to describe the gas risk to change with the blood at the level of the alveolus. So the oxygen gas, it diffuses from the lungs medium that's rich in oxygen toward the blood which is medium poor in oxygen. So here the oxygen gas diffuses from a medium of high concentration of oxygen which is the lungs to the medium of low concentration of oxygen which is blood. Whereas carbon dioxide gas diffuses from the medium that's rich in carbon dioxide, which is the blood, to the medium that is poor in carbon dioxide, the lungs. This is a scheme showing the respiratory gas exchange between the blood and the air in the alveolus. So diffusion of the oxygen of medium of high concentration, the medium of low concentration, and that of carbon dioxide from medium of low concentration to that of high concentration to that of low concentration. Question number three, you have to draw a histogram showing the composition of blood entering and leaving. So histogram, as you know, you have to draw it as like this: histogram, blood entering and blood leaving, and you have to put a title for the graph, a title. You have to give it a legend. Also, you have to give it a scale. Okay. Question number four says describe the respiratory gas exchange with blood at the level of the tissues. O2 gas diffuses from the blood, rich in O2, to the cells that are the organs, the tissues that are poor in O2, while carbon dioxide gas, it diffuses from the cells that are rich in carbon dioxide to the blood that is poor in carbon dioxide. Let's repeat this. This is the respiratory gas exchange at the level of the tissues. So oxygen gas diffuses from the blood, rich in oxygen, to the cells, organs, tissues that are poor in oxygen, while carbon dioxide gas, CO2, diffuses from the cells that are rich in CO2, rich in carbon dioxide, to the blood that is poor in carbon dioxide, poor in CO. Question number five. You have to know the characteristics that favors the respiratory gas exchange at the level of the capillaries. We have large surface area of the capillaries. We have thin wall of the blood capillaries. Also, we have slow circulation of blood in the blood capillaries. So these are three characteristics that are important for the respiratory gas exchange at the level of the capillaries. You have to know that we have large surface area of the capillaries. You have to know that we have thin wall of the blood vessels, and you have to know that we have slow circulation of blood in the blood capillaries. So these three characteristics: large surface area of the capillaries, thin wall of the blood capillaries, and slow circulation of blood in the blood capillaries. These three characteristics, they help the respiratory gas exchange at the level of the capillaries. Activity 4, transport of respiratory gases. In this figure, we have blood entering the lungs. The blood entering the lungs has dark red color. Why? Since it's poor in oxygen gas. Whereas blood leaving the lungs is going to be bright red in color. Why? Because it's rich in oxygen gas. So as you see here, we have the property here. We have poor in oxygen. That's why it's dark red in color, since it's poor in oxygen. At the level of the alveoli, we have diffusion. So oxygen gas diffuses from the lungs toward the blood, and carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood toward the lungs. How? Oxygen gas diffuses from the medium of high concentration of oxygen, which is the alveoli, to the medium of low concentration of oxygen, which is the blood. So, as I said, oxygen gas diffuses from the lungs, medium rich in O2, to the blood, medium poor in O2. Whereas the opposite is true for carbon dioxide, where carbon dioxide gas diffuses from the blood, the medium that's rich in CO2, to the lungs, the medium that is poor in CO2. So, as such, the blood is going to be rich in oxygen. The color of the blood is going to change into bright red color. This describes all the process that occurs in this. How are these gases transported by the blood? We're going to identify this in the second point of the respiration. This represents the components of the blood. Plasma, mostly water, carries dissolved molecules and plasma proteins. They are important for clotting. Red blood cells, they transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. They are bound to hemoglobin. They contain no nucleus. They are called anucleated cells. The red blood cells, they are called anucleated cells. They can't repair themselves. They have a lifespan of about 120 days. White blood cells, as you get it in grade 8, they are called the immune cells. They have a role in the immunity. Hematocrit, it represents the percentage by volume of the red blood cells in the blood. The percentage by volume of red blood cells in blood is called hematocrit. So let's repeat. We have plasma protein for clotting. It's important. It's called platelets. White blood cells and the platelets, they represent less than 1%. The RBCs, red blood cells, they represent about 45%, and the plasma represents 55%. Plasma carries dissolved molecules and contains plasma proteins for clotting. White blood cells and platelets, they represent less than 1%, and the red blood cells, they represent about 45%. They transport oxygen and carbon dioxide bound to hemoglobin, Hb, of symbol Hb. Red blood cells, they are anucleated. They don't have a nucleus. They can't repair themselves, and they have a lifespan of about 120 days. White blood cells, or they are called the immune cells, as we said, they have a role in immunity. Hematocrit, it represents percentage by volume of the red blood cells in the blood. The red blood cells, they are disc shaped, they look like the shape of a disc. They are anucleated, meaning that they don't have a nucleus. They are without a nucleus. We have about 5 million red blood cells per millimeter cube, and red blood cells contain a protein called hemoglobin that is bound to either carbon dioxide or oxygen gas, that we call them oxygen and carbon dioxide. They are called the respiratory gases. Also, you have to know that hemoglobin can bind to O2, oxygen gas, or to CO2, carbon dioxide gas. These are the notes related to the part 1 of our new chapter, respiration.